She survived a night locked with the beast, though no one in the village had expected her to, whispering among themselves that Nadia had essentially been sentenced to death when the council chose her as the sacrifice meant to appease whatever monstrous creature had been terrorizing their borders for the better part of a year. A creature the elders called simply the Beast, never speaking its true name aloud, as though naming it might somehow summon its full fury upon them all. She'd been dragged to the ancient stone tower at the forest's edge, chained inside a chamber reeking of old blood and older fear, and left there as darkness fell, praying for a mercifully quick end rather than whatever prolonged suffering the creature's reputation suggested awaited her. The beast arrived just past midnight, enormous and terrifying, dark fur bristling with barely restrained violence, eyes glowing an unnatural amber that seemed to pierce straight through her. Nadia expected to die. Instead, the creature simply watched her, circled her chained form with predatory curiosity rather than immediate violence, sniffing the air around her with something that felt almost like confusion rather than hunger. By dawn, when the village elders arrived expecting to find her remains, they instead found Nadia alive, unharmed, and the beast nowhere in sight. "Impossible," Elder Marcus breathed, staring at her with a mixture of relief and fresh terror. "No one survives a night with the beast."
"What did you do?" "Nothing," Nadia said honestly, her voice hoarse from hours of terrified silence. "It just watched me." She didn't understand it then. She didn't understand 3 days later when the beast appeared at the edge of the village in broad daylight, transforming before dozens of witnesses into a man, tall, powerfully built, dark-haired, unmistakably the Alpha King whose territory bordered their own, a king everyone believed had died in battle years earlier. "You," he said, striding directly toward her while the entire village scattered in terrified confusion. "I need you to come with me. Now."
Chapter 1. The revelation that the beast terrorizing their borders was actually Alpha King Ashen, a ruler presumed dead for 3 years, sent the entire village into chaotic panic, though Nadia found herself frozen in place as he approached, unable to process the transformation she'd just witnessed. "You're the king," she said stupidly, still struggling to reconcile the massive amber-eyed creature from the previous night with the man now standing before her, dark-haired, disheveled, dressed in nothing but tattered remnants of clothing that had apparently survived his shift. "I am," Ashen confirmed, his voice carrying the same intensity she'd sensed even in his beast form. "And you're the first person in 3 years I haven't wanted to kill on sight." The village guards, recovering from their initial shock, moved to surround him with weapons drawn, though Ashen barely acknowledged their presence. His amber-flecked dark eyes remained fixed entirely on Nadia. "Stand down," Elder Marcus commanded shakily, though his own weapon trembled visibly. "Your Majesty, we believed you'd perished in the border conflicts 3 years ago." "I nearly did," Ashen said, finally glancing toward the assembled guards with obvious impatience. "A curse, activated during that final battle, transformed me into the creature you've all been fearing since. I've spent 3 years trapped in that form, completely unable to return to my human self, until last night." "What changed?" Elder Marcus asked, though his eyes kept darting nervously toward Nadia. "She did," Ashen said simply, nodding toward Nadia. "Something about her presence broke whatever hold the curse maintained over my transformation. I need to understand why, which means I need her to accompany me back to my territory for proper investigation." "I'm not simply leaving with you," Nadia protested, finally finding her voice despite the overwhelming circumstances. "I don't even understand what you're suggesting happened, let alone why that requires me abandoning my entire life here." Ashen turned his full attention toward her, something almost pleading entering his intense expression. 3 years, Nadia. 3 years trapped as a mindless beast, causing destruction I couldn't control, terrorizing villages I once swore to protect. Last night, chained in that tower, something about your presence allowed me to finally regain human consciousness, however briefly. I need to understand that connection for the sake of properly breaking this curse permanently."
How do you even know my name? Nadia asked, unsettled by his easy familiarity despite their circumstances having provided no actual introduction. The elder said it moments ago, Ashen said, though something flickered behind his expression suggesting the admission wasn't entirely complete. Please, I understand this is considerably disorienting, but I desperately need your help understanding what happened before this curse claims me permanently. Nadia studied him carefully, torn between reasonable suspicion and genuine curiosity about circumstances that defied everything she understood about the world.
What happens if I refuse? Then I'll return to whatever the curse dictates, Ashen said quietly, likely reverting to beast form again, continuing to terrorize these borders indefinitely, unable to control the violence that form apparently compels. He paused, something vulnerable entering his tone. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your entire life, Nadia, simply to accompany me temporarily, to help investigate why your presence specifically allowed this transformation, so we might properly resolve this curse before it claims complete control permanently. Elder Marcus stepped forward hesitantly. Your Majesty, perhaps proper compensation for the village, given everything we've endured these past 3 years, believing you dead while your curse terrorized our borders repeatedly. Whatever compensation you require, Ashen said dismissively, though his attention remained fixed on Nadia. I'll arrange proper restitution for damages caused during my beast state, but I need Nadia's assistance considerably more urgently than I need to negotiate village compensation immediately. Nadia felt the weight of the entire village's expectant stares, understanding implicitly that refusing this request would likely disappoint everyone hoping for genuine resolution to 3 years of terror and uncertainty. Fine, she said finally, exhaustion and curiosity both factoring into her decision. I'll accompany you, temporarily, to help investigate whatever happened last night, but I expect proper explanation, Your Majesty, regarding exactly what you believe my presence specifically contributed to a transformation. Thank you, Ashen said, genuine relief evident in his expression.
I promise, whatever answers we discover together, I'll ensure your safety and eventual return home remains absolutely guaranteed.
Chapter 2. The journey toward Ashen's territory took the better part of a day, Nadia riding alongside him in tense, uncertain silence for much of the trip, still processing the surreal circumstances that had upended her ordinary existence within a single night. You haven't asked the obvious question, Ashen observed eventually, breaking their prolonged silence as they traveled through increasingly unfamiliar countryside. Which obvious question? Nadia asked, genuinely uncertain which among the numerous questions crowding her mind he might be referencing specifically. Why me? Ashen said. Why I was cursed in the first place, 3 years ago, during that final border battle. I assumed that was simply war, Nadia said carefully. Curses activated during conflict. I've heard of such things happening occasionally throughout various territories. This wasn't simple wartime misfortune, Ashen said, something dark entering his tone. I was betrayed. My own brother, Prince Malric, arranged the curse specifically, hoping to eliminate me as competition for the throne without directly staining his hands with obvious fratricide. Nadia's breath caught. Your own brother tried to curse you into a beast permanently? Successfully, apparently, for 3 years, Ashen confirmed grimly. He assumed I'd remain trapped indefinitely, unable to return and reclaim my rightful throne, while he consolidated power, believing me either dead or permanently incapacitated. Does he know you've regained human form, even temporarily? Nadia asked, genuine concern entering her voice, despite her earlier reluctance regarding this entire situation. Not yet, Ashen said. Which is precisely why understanding what specifically allowed this transformation matters considerably beyond simple personal curiosity. If I can properly break this curse, permanently rather than temporarily, I can reclaim my throne and expose Malric's treachery before he further consolidates whatever power he's accumulated during my absence. That's considerably more complicated than I initially anticipated, Nadia said, genuine sympathy tempering her earlier wariness. I'm sorry about your brother's betrayal. Family betrayal cuts considerably deeper than any wound sustained in actual battle, Ashen said quietly, though I confess I have had 3 years trapped as a mindless beast to process that particular pain, without ever finding genuine resolution. They arrived at his territory's border as evening approached, Ashen's remaining loyal guards greeting his return with visible shock and relief, quickly organizing proper escort toward what remained of his previous royal residence, apparently maintained skeletally during his 3-year absence by servants uncertain whether their king might eventually return. "This is where I'll need your continued assistance," Ashen explained as they settled into a private study within his considerably diminished but still functional palace. "I need to understand precisely what occurred last night, chemically or magically or however this connection actually manifests, so we might properly replicate whatever allowed temporary human consciousness." "I don't have any magical training," Nadia said honestly. "I'm simply a village healer, nothing more remarkable than basic herbal knowledge and practical medical skill." "Perhaps that's precisely the connection," Ashen said thoughtfully.
Healing magic often operates through entirely different mechanisms than combat or curse-based sorcery. Your natural healing instincts might have inadvertently triggered some latent counter-curse properties, simply through proximity and genuine compassionate intention. "That seems like considerable speculation," Nadia said skeptically. "It's the only theory that makes logical sense," Ashen admitted, "given that no other person has approached me during beast form these past 3 years without immediately triggering violent, uncontrollable response. Your presence alone somehow allowed rational thought to persist, however temporarily, throughout that transformation." Nadia considered this explanation carefully, genuine curiosity finally overriding her earlier reluctance regarding this entire complicated situation. What would investigating this connection actually involve, practically speaking? "I'll need to allow the curse to reactivate," Ashen said, something grim entering his tone despite obvious necessity underlying the suggestion. "With you present, under carefully controlled circumstances, to determine whether your presence alone triggers the same temporary human consciousness, or whether last night's tower confinement contributed additional relevant factors." "You want me present while you transform into that creature again?" Nadia clarified, unable to keep apprehension from her voice despite genuine investment in resolving his situation. "I understand the fear that request reasonably provokes," Ashen said gently. "I won't force this investigation without your explicit consent, Nadia."
"But I genuinely believe you represent my best opportunity toward permanently breaking this curse, rather than remaining trapped indefinitely between human and beast existence." Nadia studied him carefully, weighing legitimate fear against genuine sympathy for circumstances she now understood considerably more completely than her initial terrified confusion had allowed. "All right," she said finally, surprising herself with her own resolve. "I'll help you investigate this properly, though I expect considerable safety precautions, given what we're both risking through this particular experiment." Chapter 3. The transformation experiment was scheduled for that same evening. Ashen insisting delay would only prolong uncertainty neither of them could genuinely afford, given his brother's potentially strengthening position. "I need you to remain calm, regardless of what you witness," Ashen instructed, as guards secured heavy chains around a specially reinforced chamber within the palace's lower levels. The beast form retains some fragmented awareness, apparently, based on what happened last night, but I cannot guarantee complete control, particularly during initial transformation moments. "I understand," Nadia said, though her voice carried more confidence than she genuinely felt, as guards positioned themselves at safe distances around the chamber's perimeter. Ashen removed his outer clothing, leaving simple undergarments that would presumably survive the transformation's physical stress, before settling into the chamber's center. "Whatever happens," he said, meeting her gaze directly, "thank you for being willing to attempt this despite legitimate fear." The transformation began moments later, considerably more violent and painful-looking than Nadia had anticipated based on witnessing only its aftermath the previous night. Ashen's body contorted, bones audibly shifting beneath skin that darkened and thickened into fur, his cries of pain transforming gradually into something considerably more animalistic as the beast form fully emerged. Nadia forced herself to remain still, despite every instinct screaming toward flight, watching as the creature, Ashen, she reminded herself firmly, still ashen despite this monstrous exterior, turned its amber-glowing eyes toward her with obvious predatory focus.
"It's me, Nadia," she said softly, echoing whatever instinct had apparently guided her previous night's survival. "You're still in there, Ashen. I know you are." The beast's posture shifted slightly, head tilting with something almost like recognition rather than pure predatory calculation. It approached slowly, guards tensing visibly around the chamber's perimeter, though Nadia raised her hand slightly, signaling them to remain still, despite obvious concern. "That's it," Nadia continued, maintaining steady, calm tone despite her racing heart. "Focus on my voice. You're not simply a mindless creature, Ashen. You're still yourself, buried beneath whatever curse Maloric arranged." The beast's amber eyes seemed to sharpen slightly, something like genuine consciousness flickering behind its predatory gaze. It made a low, almost questioning sound, considerably different from the aggressive growling Nadia had expected based on village reports of its previous rampages. "You recognize me," Nadia said softly, genuine wonder entering her voice despite the situation's obvious danger. "Something about my presence is actually helping, exactly as you theorized." The creature's massive form began shifting again, considerably more controlled than the initial transformation, gradually reverting toward Ashen's human shape while maintaining what appeared to be genuine cognitive awareness throughout the process. "Nadia," Ashen finally managed, human voice returning alongside his human form, though obvious exhaustion from the transformation's physical demands was evident in his weakened posture. "It worked."
"I maintained consciousness throughout the entire transformation, rather than simply regaining awareness afterward as happened last night." "What does that mean?" Nadia asked, moving closer despite Guard's obvious hesitation regarding her approach. "It means your theory about healing magic countering the curse appears accurate," Ashen said, still catching his breath from the transformation's physical toll. "Your presence doesn't simply allow temporary consciousness after the fact. It actually influences the transformation process itself, suggesting genuine counter-magical properties rather than simple coincidental proximity." "So what happens next?" Nadia asked, though something in Ashen's expression suggested the answer might involve considerably more complicated implications than simple scientific curiosity. "Next," Ashen said carefully, "I need to understand whether this connection requires your continued physical presence indefinitely, or whether we might develop some method of extracting and replicating whatever specific property your healing magic provides, allowing permanent transformation reversal without requiring your constant proximity." Nadia felt something complicated stir in her chest at this explanation. Relief that genuine progress was being made, alongside unexpected disappointment at the implication that her usefulness might be entirely transactional, limited purely to magical properties rather than any genuine personal connection developing between them. "That makes sense," she said, though something in her tone apparently betrayed more complicated feelings than she'd intended to reveal. Ashen studied her carefully, something perceptive entering his expression despite obvious exhaustion. "That's not entirely what you're feeling, is it?"
Chapter 4. Nadia hesitated, uncertain how honestly to answer, given the complicated circumstances surrounding their entire acquaintance. "I suppose I hadn't fully considered whether this connection was purely magical in nature," she admitted finally, "or whether genuine personal regard might factor into it as well." Something shifted in Ashen's expression, careful hope replacing his earlier scientific focus. "I've been wondering something similar myself," he confessed. "These past 2 days, working alongside you toward understanding this curse, I've found myself genuinely drawn toward you specifically, beyond simply appreciation for whatever magical properties you apparently possess." "Genuinely drawn?" Nadia repeated carefully, testing whether she'd correctly interpreted his meaning. "I find myself considerably more interested in you as a person," Ashen clarified, "than simply as a magical solution toward breaking this curse. Your compassion, your willingness to help despite legitimate fear, your genuine kindness even toward a creature that terrorized your entire village for months, these qualities matter considerably to me, beyond whatever counter-magical properties they might coincidentally represent." Nadia felt warmth spread through her chest at this admission, surprised by how genuinely relieved she felt hearing him articulate feelings she'd been hesitant to examine too closely herself. "I've been experiencing something similar," she admitted, "though I confess uncertainty about whether my usefulness was purely magical made me hesitant to acknowledge genuine personal feelings developing alongside this investigation." "Your usefulness was never purely magical," Ashen said firmly.
"Even before we discovered your healing properties countered this curse, I found myself genuinely appreciating your directness, your courage despite legitimate fear, your willingness to challenge my assumptions rather than simply deferring to royal authority."
Their conversation was interrupted by General Aldrich, Ashen's most trusted remaining commander, arriving with urgent news that immediately shifted their focus toward considerably more pressing concerns. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, "word has reached us that Prince Malric has learned of your return. He's mobilizing forces, apparently intending to eliminate you permanently before you can properly reclaim your throne." Ashen's expression hardened immediately. "How much time do we have?" "Perhaps 2 days," Aldrich estimated grimly. "Malric's forces are considerably closer than our own defensive positions, given how thoroughly he's consolidated territory during your absence." "Then we need to accelerate this investigation considerably," Ashen said, turning back toward Nadia with obvious urgency. "I need to understand whether extended exposure to your presence might permanently break this curse, rather than simply allowing temporary consciousness during transformation." "How would we test that?" Nadia asked, genuine concern entering her voice given the escalating stakes. "Extended proximity," Ashen said. "Days rather than hours, allowing whatever counter-magical properties you possess sufficient time to potentially achieve permanent effect, rather than simply temporary suppression." "We don't have days, apparently," Nadia pointed out, given Malric's approaching forces. "Then we'll need to combine investigation with preparation for potential conflict," Ashen said grimly. "I cannot face Malric's forces while still vulnerable to uncontrolled transformation."
Breaking this curse permanently, or at minimum achieving reliable control, represents genuine military necessity now, beyond simply personal curiosity. General Aldrich cleared his throat carefully. "Your Majesty, if I might suggest, perhaps the healer's presence alongside our forces during the potential confrontation might prove strategically valuable, regardless of whether the curse achieves complete permanent resolution beforehand." Nadia felt her stomach tighten at this suggestion. "You're suggesting I accompany military forces into active conflict?" "I wouldn't ask that of you without your explicit consent," Ashen said quickly, though his expression suggested genuine desperation given the escalating circumstances. "But if you're willing, your presence might prove decisive in preventing complete transformation during whatever confrontation with Malric's forces ultimately occurs." Nadia considered this request carefully, weighing legitimate fear about active military conflict against her rapidly developing feelings for Ashen and genuine investment in his successful reclamation of his rightful throne. "I'll come," she said finally, surprising herself with her own resolve despite obvious danger, "though I expect considerable protection given my complete lack of military training or combat experience." "You'll have my personal protection throughout," Ashen said firmly, relief evident in his expression. "I won't allow you exposed to unnecessary danger, regardless of how strategically valuable your presence apparently proves." "Then let's prepare properly," Nadia said, "for whatever confrontation awaits us against your brother's forces." Ashen reached for her hand, gratitude and something considerably warmer evident in his touch.
"Thank you," he said quietly, "for choosing to help, despite every reasonable excuse you might have offered instead." Chapter 5. The confrontation with Malric's forces occurred 2 days later, exactly as General Aldrich had predicted, along the border separating Ashen's diminished but loyal territory from whatever considerable strength his brother had accumulated during 3 years of presumed absence. Nadia remained close to Ashen throughout the tense preparations, genuine fear evident despite her determination to help however possible. "What happens if the curse activates during actual battle?" she asked, watching soldiers organize defensive positions across the contested border. "Then your presence hopefully prevents complete loss of control," Ashen said, though uncertainty colored his tone despite obvious attempt at confidence. "We haven't tested this theory under actual combat stress, only controlled circumstances within the palace." Malric's forces appeared on the horizon as dawn broke, considerably more numerous than Ashen's remaining loyal soldiers, though determination rather than despair seemed to motivate the defenders given their king's unexpected, miraculous return. "Brother," Malric called out once close enough for voice to carry across the battlefield, dismounting from his horse with obvious confidence despite facing his supposedly cursed sibling. "I confess genuine surprise you've managed even temporary human form. I'd assumed the curse considerably more permanent than this apparently proves." "Your treachery ends today, Malric," Ashen replied, voice carrying across the battlefield with authority Nadia hadn't previously witnessed from him. "Whatever curse you arranged, I've found the means to properly counter it." "Have you?" Malric's confidence flickered slightly, though he quickly recovered his composure.
Regardless, I command considerably greater forces than whatever loyalists remain willing to fight for a king everyone believed dead for 3 years. The battle commenced shortly after, chaos and violence erupting across the contested border as both forces engaged directly. Nadia remained close to Ashen as instructed, genuine terror mounting as she witnessed the brutal reality of actual combat for the first time in her sheltered existence. Midway through the confrontation, Ashen sustained a serious wound. His human form beginning to waver, his pain apparently triggered the curse's underlying mechanism, despite Nadia's continued proximity. "Ashen!" Nadia cried, rushing toward him despite guards' attempts to maintain protective distance around her position. She reached him just as transformation began, placing her hands directly against his chest, channeling whatever healing instinct had apparently provided countermagical properties throughout their previous investigation. "Stay with me," she said fiercely, echoing the same words that had apparently allowed his consciousness to persist during their controlled experiment. "You're not simply a beast, Ashen. You're the rightful king, and I need you to remain yourself throughout this battle." The transformation slowed, then reversed entirely, Ashen's wound healing with unexpected rapidity as golden light seemed to pass between them, considerably more dramatic than their previous controlled experiment had demonstrated. "The curse is breaking," Ashen gasped, genuine wonder evident despite the battle's ongoing chaos. "Permanently, I believe, rather than simply temporary suppression." With renewed strength and confidence, Ashen rallied his remaining forces, eventually overwhelming Malric's considerably larger but less motivated army through sheer determination and tactical superiority. Malric himself was captured attempting to flee, his treachery finally exposed before witnesses who could properly testify to his crimes. That evening, with victory secured and Malric imprisoned awaiting proper trial, Ashen found Nadia tending to wounded soldiers within a hastily established medical tent. "You saved my life," he said quietly, watching her work with evident admiration. Not simply through breaking this curse, but through genuine courage, rushing toward danger rather than remaining safely distant. "I couldn't simply watch you transform without attempting to help," Nadia said, continuing her medical work despite the conversation, regardless of personal danger involved. "I love you," Ashen said simply, the admission emerging with startling directness despite the battlefield's continued chaos surrounding them. "I've known for days now, those circumstances prevented proper opportunity for genuine declaration until this moment." Nadia finally paused her work, meeting his gaze directly. "I love you as well," she said, surprising herself with how naturally the words emerged, despite everything complicated about their circumstances. "Somewhere between that terrifying first night and this considerably more hopeful battlefield, I fell in love with who you actually are, beyond simply curse-breaking convenience." Their wedding, when it happened 3 months later, celebrated not just genuine love, but the kingdom's restoration under its rightful king, free from both literal curse and metaphorical tyranny his brother's betrayal had nearly achieved. "Do you take this woman," the priest asked, "as your true queen, freely chosen through genuine love?" "I do," Ashen said, dark eyes filled with complete devotion, "more certainly than any decision throughout my entire reign, cursed or otherwise." When Nadia spoke her own vows, she felt every trace of that terrified village healer finally transform into someone genuinely secure, genuinely loved, having somehow found her place beside a king who valued her compassion considerably more than any magical convenience it happened to provide.